Well, welcome back. Day 2, creating lasting change, the 7 master steps for maximum impact. Our mission, become more effective leaders, become agents of change, be able to step into any situation and make a difference. Well, yesterday I dumped the whole load on you. How'd you hold up? Did you do your homework? Did you take a little time to capture and be honest with yourself about which of the 6 human needs are the driving force for you, which are the top 2? Because they guide you. They affect you more than almost anything else. Did you take a look at what are some of the areas of your life that you're really pleased with? And what is happening in your life? How do your life conditions match your blueprint? Did you take a look at some places where you're not so thrilled? And did you notice where the difference was? How your life conditions don't quite equal your blueprint or maybe fall short of that? And did you make any decisions about what you need to change in your life conditions or in your blueprint? If not, if you want to influence other people, I know it's tough on yourself, but you might be a good place to start. Today, we're going to lay the foundation very quickly for the 7 master steps. These steps that will help you create lasting change in anyone you want to have an impact on. In fact, what I can promise you, if you follow these steps and you really are committed to them, you're consistent in their approach, you're not going to bump into anything you're not going to be able to help break the pattern on or help someone make a change with. You really will be an effective agent of change. And again, that's proven over 3 decades in just about every kind of environment you can imagine, from sports to politics to working with scientists or business people, prisoners, children, you name it. So it does take creativity. The art of your contribution as a leader or a change agent is going to be what you bring to the table. What I want to bring to you is a format that can kind of guide you. And so I want to answer 2 questions here. First, what do you really need to know to help anybody really make a lasting change? And there are 3 things. The first thing you have to know, whether you're working with a friend or an associate or want to make a difference with your kids, or you're a therapist, or you're working with somebody that you're managing, always, if you want to have an impact, the first thing you have to understand is, what does this person need and what do they want? Now, here's the good news. If you don't know what somebody needs and wants, what are your chances of influencing them? Remember the fundamental principle I brought up yesterday? To influence someone else, you have to know what already influences them. If I try to convince you to do something and I start telling you things that you disagree with, that you don't believe, you're going to shut me down in a heartbeat. If you don't do it verbally or directly, you're going to do it in your head. If you're going to be able to arrive at influencing someone, leading someone, you've got to enter their world. You can't enter the world unless you understand it a bit. Now, here's the good news. You already know what people need. We've described 6 human needs that are universal. Everybody needs all 6. What are they? Certainty, you remember. Uncertainty or variety. Significance, feeling unique, special, important, feeling needed. The feeling of connection and love. And then the primary needs, the needs of the spirit. We must grow and we must contribute. And remember, everybody meets the first 4 needs. And if they work harder or if they have to lie to themselves, but very few people meet the final 2 where fulfillment really shows up. So we know what needs they're after. What we really want to know is, what do they want? And people speak in codes. So if you said to somebody, okay, well, what do you really want? And they say, well, I want to make $1 billion. You instantly know which of the 6 needs they value most. What need structure is most important to that person? If they say, I want to make $1 billion. Not hard to figure out. Significance with a capital S. It's not good. It's not bad. It just is. That's what's driving them. If somebody else says, well, what's most important to me is getting control of my life and just I feel like I'm out of control. I want to feel like I know what's going to happen and how it's going to happen and not have so much uncertainty in my life. Then clearly, what is that person's driving need? Certainty. So you get the sense of this. So when someone tells you what they want, they start to reveal to you their blueprint. In other words, which needs are most important to them and their beliefs about how to meet them. So if you say, well, tell me what you really want, and the person says, well, gosh, I want to get control of my life. I'm just tired of feeling like I'm out of control. I never know what's going to happen. It's always changing. I want more security in my life. I'm tired of being out of control. And what are they after? They're after the need of certainty. Their belief is the way to get it is through the value of controlling things. That's their model of the world. That's their blueprint. And right now, their life conditions don't match their blueprint. So you begin to understand what they're after. And now you can begin to assist them because you know what the target is. You know what they're going after. You can also predict what their problems are. Somebody's always trying to be in control of something. What could you predict would be their problem? Well, the problem is they're always going to be stressed because you can't control everything. You can't control the weather. You can influence other people, but you can't control them. Your kids are still going to make their own choices at times. You can influence them again, but you're not going to always control it. We know that in our hearts if we're honest with ourselves. So somebody's trying to control everything is going to be stressed all the time because their model produces stress. That blueprint will equal stress a good portion of the time. Does this give you some kind of insight? Again, I'm not going to go through this in total detail. We'll walk through this later, but that's the first thing you got to know. Know what's driving the game. Know what they need, know what they want. Now, the second thing you got to know is what's preventing them from getting it. That's the second thing you got to know. What's getting in the way? And we've already described what that is. There are two things that keep people from getting what they want. Number one is the state they're in. Have you ever been in a place where, you can't come up with the answer? You can't even remember a word like how to spell a difficult word like the, or your home telephone number or address? Why don't you know the answer? What's getting in the way? You're in a lousy state. You're in a stupid state. A few minutes later, I remember. I remember my email. I remember my phone number. I remember how to spell that word. Haven't you been in those places where the state you're in kept you from getting what you want? So sometimes people they can't get to feeling love because they're so angry. It's a pattern of focus. It's a pattern of language that makes them angry. So we can change that person's pattern and suddenly they'll feel significant. They'll feel loved. They'll feel connected. Or the second thing that affects getting what they want might be their beliefs or the emotional pattern that they get into most often. That's their model of the world. So if you want to make a change with somebody, first you got to know what it is they want and need, and that'll tell you a lot. Second is you got to know what's preventing them from getting there. What belief system? What mindset? What way of using their body that's putting them in a state where they can't come up with the answer? What focus is keeping them from getting there? What language patterns? What's preventing them? And then finally, number three, you got to be able to understand how to get them to where they want to be. How do you get them to change their life conditions or change their blueprint? And to do that, I've refined 7 simple master steps to changing anybody. Now, where do these come from? Well, they came from my life experience. I remember very early in my life, I started studying Ericksonian patterns and, NLP and Gestalt and all these different approaches. And I remember I went through, one of these classes, for example, in NLP, and I learned from John Grinder, one of the co-founders of NLP. He was a brilliant, brilliant man. And I got a chance to witness his work and learn from him. But after the first 4 days of learning in the 6-month program, I was on fire. Because, at the end of each day, I would write down everything he said, every metaphor, every story, every example, every distinction that he made, anything I learned. I made myself pull it back out of my head. And then I try to find a way to organize it. Because it was all these gems, but there was no structure to it. It was like I was learning all these tools. And I thought, if you want to get a result, you can teach a dog new tricks. He was teaching me these great tricks on how to produce a result. But what I was interested in is knowing why they worked. And so interestingly enough, I came out of his programs and I was on fire. And I would turn to people in the class. In those days, it was mostly marriage and family counselors, psychologists, and psychiatrists. And I wasn't any of those things. I was just a guy that wanted to help people. So after the first 4 days of learning how we could help people to, for example, wipe out a lifetime phobia in less than an hour, something that traditionally could take years to do, I turned to these psychologists and my psychiatrists and I said, hey guys, let's go find some phobics and cure them. And they're all looking at me like, you're obviously not an educated man. This is a 6-month training. You got to go through all 6 months and then you got to be tested in these things. And if you pass the testing, then you get certified. And then once you're certified, you can do this. And I thought, what are you talking about? I'm a business guy. You don't wait for someone to certify you before you go do something. So I said, I want to help somebody tonight. It was 11 o'clock at night in Los Angeles, California. We were staying at the Holiday Inn there doing a class off Century Boulevard, right around the corner from the airport. And I thought, where do you go at 11 o'clock at night to help somebody? Where do you find somebody who needs help at 11 o'clock at night in Los Angeles? And I thought, Denny's. Anybody at Denny's at 11 o'clock at night needs help. And so that's where I started, literally. I went down the street. It was only a block away. Went into Denny's, found this poor old man crunched over, the counter there. And I went up to him, sir, tell me what it is you need. What is it you want? What do you need to change? I have the ability to change anything. And I got, completely over the top. And I'm smacking my chest and being all excited. And I learned very quickly this is not the best approach. So I went up to Canada, to Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and that's where I started my career. In fact, it's kind of ironic. That's where I am right now in a studio talking to you. And so the way I built it was by challenging people. Actually, originally, challenging traditional psychologists and psychiatrists and saying, listen, if you think what I'm saying is an exaggeration, bring me one of your patients. I do these free guest events. Come, I'll do a demonstration on stage. Bring me one of the patients you've never been able to cure. That was my standard tool. It happened by accident. I was on a radio show, and this psychiatrist called up and started attacking me. And, I said, sir, you never met me. You never met any of my clients. You're calling me a liar and a charlatan. And I basically developed a technique of entrapping him into having to basically put up or shut up. And so for the first, 6, 9, 10 months of me doing this, that was my signature. I was going to conquer these psychologists and show them, how this work could be done so much better. And fortunately, I wasn't successful all the time, but I was always successful publicly. So that was very helpful and encouraged me enormously, and I made a lot of distinctions. But the real value was I was making all these changes happen. And so I got a lot of attention, including John Grinder's, and people saying, how is he doing this? He's using the same techniques we're doing. How is he producing these changes so powerfully, so quickly? I took people who have been stuttering. No one taught me how to stop stuttering, but I figured out the pattern. It took me several hours. I was sweating. I began to wonder if I could pull it off, but I began to realize, look, this person only stutters when they get in certain states. They didn't stutter on every word. They didn't stutter every situation. When they got scared, they stuttered. When they thought of certain words, they stuttered. So I started watching the body. I said, stuttering is a state. And I began to see that when this person stuttered, sure enough, they changed their physical body. They would, for example, they'd take a big breath in, and then they'd start to try to talk, but not release the air. And all this pressure would build up in their body, and all of a sudden, all the air would come out at once, and sure enough, they'd stutter. Or they'd try to start talking without taking any air in, so there was no air going through their voice box. And then they'd suck in the air and shove out all this air, and sure enough, again, they'd stutter. So I realized they were stopping the flow of the air through the voice box. So I'd say to this person, listen, I want you to sing that word, shout that word, the word they normally stumble on. And they couldn't stutter. So then, now that you had quite an interesting pattern to erupt, because I'd say stutter and they couldn't do it. And so now I had this cool technique. So I kept creating all these different approaches. But what was interesting was I began to look at to see what was it I was doing that was helping me succeed that was different. Part of it was a mindset, that's for sure, a passion and intensity. But the other part of it was I had a sequence of things I did. What I found is, ideally, in trying to create an impact on somebody's life and trying to influence them for a greater good, there's a sequence of things that are important to go through to have that impact. If you step out of the sequence, it's okay, but you tend to have the most power if you follow this sequence. So what is the first one? Step one is understand and appreciate their world. That's the first step in the 7 master steps of changing anyone. Why is this the first one? Well, because if you're trying to influence somebody and you don't understand what drives them, what they want, what they fear, what excites them, what they value, what their rules are, you're basically flying blind. Plus, you're just basically generally trying to probably influence them the way you would be influenced. Well, if the person's just like you, that'll work fine. But if you're a person who's going to be a leader, you have to be able to reach people that aren't like you. To do that, you got to enter their world. Remember the principle I said earlier? I'll say it again and again because repetition is the mother of skill. To influence another person, you have to know what already influences them. So in this first step of understanding and appreciating somebody's world, notice I didn't say label and judge them, right? Because the minute you judge somebody, you can't influence them because they feel that judgment. What makes people feel safe is to feel that you appreciate them. You're sincerely interested. That's what opens them. Not that you want to hear enough to label them. So what do we want to appreciate? What do we want to understand about their world? We want to appreciate and understand, number one, what needs are driving them. We want to know the why behind their behavior. Oftentimes you see people doing things and you think they're doing it for a certain reason, but everybody does things for different reasons. There's only 6 primary reasons, 6 needs. But assuming that, for example, somebody contributed money because they wanted to make a contribution isn't always true. Sometimes people donate money because they want significance. They want their name on the door. Or they made a contribution because they feel guilty and they want to feel comfortable about their life again because they have all this money and they didn't have to earn it. So it gives them comfort and certainty to be able to give it away. Everybody does things for different reasons. Does that make sense? So we want to know what's driving this person so we can help them. What are those top 2 needs? What's driving them most? That was the first thing we want to know. It's the first step here also. What else do we want to know to appreciate and understand their world? Well, we want to understand what do they believe life's about. Again, tomorrow's session, we're going to take the entire session and focus on just this first step. It's that important. I want to walk you through all the different types of beliefs. I think you'll find it really fun because you can ask yourself the questions. Questions like, who are my role models growing up? Do you think that somebody's decisions, their life, the way they approach things would be different if their role model in life was, let's say, Mother Teresa, or if it was Osama bin Laden? That's not a hard one to figure out. If you find out what people believe, what they value, what's most important about them, the more you understand about the world, the greater the chances you can enter the world and you can help to lead them and influence them for a positive good. So this first step was, by the way, the first thing I did with Bob. Remember Bob, the man who wanted to kill himself and his kids? Instead of just deciding, oh my God, this is a horrible person, I decided I needed to understand and appreciate his world. And because I stayed curious and got underneath it, I found out that this is not a bad man, this isn't a mean man, and he's certainly about to do something that would be unbelievably destructive and painful for everybody, something unconscionable. But instead of judging it, where I couldn't influence him and judging him, I wanted to understand him. I want to not just understand him intellectually, I want to appreciate his feelings. And when I got into Bob, and I started to understand that Bob's life was about freedom, Bob's life was about having fun, Bob's life was being fully alive and living passionately, Bob and I started to feel a connection. And all of a sudden, I'm vested in Bob, and Bob can feel that. Do you think that increases my chances of influencing him as opposed to just being some outsider looking in on him and deciding what's wrong with him and I'm going to fix him? See, I never believe that there's anybody that's broken. No one's broken. I'm not here to fix them. If you do that mentality, then you create this holier-than-thou approach that some therapists do, some business leaders do, some parents do, some friends do, and I'm going to tell you one thing. It's going to limit who you can reach. Only people that feel inferior are going to respond to you. But if you can really feel for that person and understand that person, all of a sudden I'm starting to say, wait a second, I got a different picture of Bob. I understand Bob's world. I can understand why Bob feels dead inside. And as that understanding starts to grow in you, now your capacity to make a difference is going to grow with it. The other thing you have to understand about somebody's world is that people were all part of a tribe. One way of describing human beings is that we really are the result of all the relationships we've had, all the people we've met and interacted with in our lives. We're part of a tribe. We impact the tribe. We influence other people, and we're influenced by them. So the more you can understand about the context in which somebody lives, are they the third child that everybody's looked down on? Are they the first son that everyone demanded the most from? What was the mindset? Do they have a parent that is all controlling growing up? Now, this is not so you have to go live in their past, but if you can understand the context in which they've grown up or the context in which they live now, they're a lawyer. So every day of their life, they go and they put somebody on the stand, and their job is to break them. And it's not hard to figure out, if you understand that context, why they might have trouble in their personal relationships, because all day long they're reinforced for a behavior and they go home and put their spouse on the stand. So the more you understand about someone's environment, their context, what they get rewarded for, what they get punished for in the environment they live in, the more you're also going to understand how to influence them effectively. And by the way, when we're talking about understanding and appreciating somebody's world, we're not talking about doing this as if this person is someone you're studying from a foreign culture or someone you're looking down your nose at or categorizing. What will make this relationship work? When you look at therapy, a lot of different studies have tried to take different therapies and see which one's most effective. And, some studies will promote one approach and another will promote another. But in reality, this research again and again and again shows the most important factor in somebody feeling like they can really change their life is that the person they work with, the coach, the mentor, the therapist, the manager, the leader they work with, they have a great relationship with, they have rapport with. So one of the most important things here is to create a base in your relationship up front that you're not asking these questions so you can just manipulate them, but to find a way to meet their needs. If you can establish that while you're discovering what somebody wants and what they need, while you're understanding their world, I can promise you, going to the next step where you're going to begin to start the change process will move much more smoothly. Change will happen much more easily. So what is step 2 of the 7 master steps? Okay, you understand the person's world. You understand what's driving them. You understand what's going on. Let's use Bob as the example. Go, my goodness, this man, he really is a good soul. He feels like he has failed as a man. He doesn't have work. He doesn't support his family. He's not producing the result. His family is suffering. He has no reason to live. He's got to go. That's his belief system because he has no meaning. He's insignificant. He's disconnected. In fact, to give you some background, I found out later on, his wife didn't know about this plan, obviously. She, in fact, when he was coming to the seminar, thought, oh boy, all she knew is he hadn't worked for 3 years. He wouldn't talk to the children. He barely talked to her. When friends would come over, he wouldn't come out of the room. And she figured, well, maybe if he goes and drinks Kool-Aid with some guru guy at a seminar, maybe that'll do it. I'll try anything to get him going. So she encouraged him to go for that reason. She had no clue what was going on. So what do you do with a guy like Bob once you understand his world? Well, you got to help him to change. What is the ultimate tool that makes change possible? Leverage. Step 2 is you got to get leverage. Now, what does that mean? Leverage, well, think about what a lever does, or a lever, as they say in Great Britain. What a lever does, what leverage does, is it allows you, with a small amount of effort, to move something that seems impossible to move. I can move this boulder if I put the lever in the right place in the right way. With just a little bit of effort, I can move this giant, immovable item. Well, leverage in a human being comes when a human being moves from this should change to this must change. Everybody's got a list of shoulds. I should lose some weight. I should follow through. I should spend more time with my kids. Everybody's got the should list. I should make more calls at work. But most people don't actually change. They just what I call should all over themselves. And you don't want to should all over yourself. That doesn't make anything better. But when something's a must, there's something about human beings. When it's a must for them, not everyone else says it's a must, but there's a point in you. Have you ever had this happen? A point where you keep talking about changing something, you keep saying you got to do it, and you start and stop, and you don't follow through, and then one day you finally go, that's it. No more. This is changing now. I am not going to spend one more day this way. And you suddenly go out and you start your run or your walk, or you join the gym and you really follow through, or you go on the diet, or you want to go, this is enough. I'm not going to live this way. I'm not going to put up with this. And you leave that job or that environment, or you confront that person, or you confront yourself. Or maybe, have you ever had this happen? Ever been in a relationship way too long? You know what I'm talking about? Where it's not right, but you keep saying it should change, but you don't have the guts to do it. Or you keep telling yourself, well, it'll get better in the future. Leverage happens when you get to the point where your brain and body become one and you go, this is it, no more. It's when you hit an emotional threshold. It's where change is no longer an option. It's where all of a sudden failing to change in your mind is much more painful than the fear of changing and it not working, or feeling like a failure, or the uncertainty of change. See, most people don't change because, even though they're unhappy, what they're doing meets some of their needs. Let's say somebody smokes cigarettes, and they know, oh my God, it's a terrible habit, and I could get cancer, and I'm coughing a lot, and everything else, but it meets some of your needs. When you smoke cigarettes, you feel certainty and comfort from taking that deep breath in, like we talked about. You get a chance to change your state if you're all stressed out, and all of a sudden you go out and you smoke a cigarette. It totally changes your state, creates variety. It's kind of taking time for yourself. You go out and smoke, and you're connecting with yourself. What do we learn in the last session? Well, anytime something you do meets at least 3 of your needs, it becomes an addiction. So all of a sudden, you do this again and again. Why would someone want to stop? Well, maybe it's, on the one hand, it makes you feel comfortable, but on the other, you have some uncertainty because now you're coughing a lot. You don't feel good. Or maybe you're in a relationship with somebody and they hate cigarettes. They hate the smell of smoke. It disgusts them, and you love them, and you don't want to lose their love. Now there's some leverage. Now there's a cost. Now you can lose some of your needs if you don't make a change. But, a lot of people kind of coast along and say, I'm going to change. They don't until they hit this point of leverage, this emotional threshold. Where does this happen in your life? Again, go back to relationship. You ever been in a relationship and kept saying you're going to change, and then finally one day you said, that's it. Not another day, not another hour. It's been painful in the past. It's painful right now. It's going to be painful in the future. This is over. And you finally took action. Has that ever happened to you? Where's an area where you finally made a change? Did you ever smoke cigarettes? Did you finally stop one day, even though you tried many other times? What finally got you to stop? Leverage. Somewhere you linked up in your head that failing to change equals massive, immediate, unbearable pain, or a level of pain you weren't willing to settle for anymore, or, man, by changing now, I'm going to get massive, amazing, extraordinary levels of pleasure. We all function this way. So leverage is power, but what's leverage is different for different people. See, some people leverage is, if you don't stop doing this, you're off this team. Right? The people who don't want to lose being on the team, they don't want to be part of that group, so they hate it, but they make the change. Other people, if you threaten them like that, to them, to comply with you is to give up their identity. They value having their own choices more than you telling them, and they'll leave the team. You get the metaphor? How do you know what leverage is going to work? How do you know what's going to push somebody over the edge? You try different things. You know what the outcome is, and you try something. If it doesn't work, you change your approach. That's what I do. And you'll see many examples of this in our Inner Strength films if you have an interest, and you'll also see them at the end of this program on our DVD. But what I will tell you is, if you know which of the 6 human needs a person values most, what are their top 2, which I call their driving force, then you know where the most leverage is. Someone who values significance, if they can associate that if I continue this, I'm going to lose significance, I'm going to look like I'm less than, they'll change in a heartbeat. If they value love, and they think if I don't change now, if they get in their body, failing to change now is going to cost me love, they'll change in a heartbeat. If they value certainty, and you feel like they're going to lose control, lose certainty if they don't make this change, they'll change in a heartbeat. So if you want a shortcut to finding the best leverage, look for what need structure they value most and relate the leverage to that. Here, I'll give you a dramatic example. I had another seminar one time, and I found out again there was a gentleman in the seminar, different situation. His name is Jim. In fact, we made a movie of this, a film of this. So if you're a therapist, you can actually get credits for watching it and following through and learning the distinctions on it. But Jim was this sweet, sweet man. He stood up, and he was emotionally broke. And what I mean by that is, the guy was on his last leg. He came to the seminar kind of as his last approach, seeing if there's anything he could do to make his life work. And he was suicidal. I'm using a suicide example again because they're the most dramatic, as you might guess. So if you can do this with somebody who's suicidal, you can obviously do it with somebody who's frustrated or overwhelmed or feeling depressed. So my point is, with Jim, I found out where he was. I started talking to him from the front of the room, and here was Jim's model of the world. Jim's entire life was about contribution. He wanted to be significant enough in his life that he would be loved, and the way to do that was significantly succeed in business, be a really successful businessman, make a lot of money, but don't just make it for yourself. Donate that money and make a difference for other people so they'll love you. So be significant, contribute, so you'll get love. Kind of follow the need structure? So what's the problem with that? Well, nothing. Jim was a very driven man, very smart man. So in a 12-year period of time, he built up a $24 million a year business. Pretty darn good from scratch. Did it with a couple of small partners. And Jim, though, along the way, his greatest pride was not only was the successful Orange County businessman, but that he took a significant amount of his profits and he donated to people that were in a handicapped situation. So here's this beautiful man, a giver, somebody who's trying to contribute. He's just a little love bug, just wanted love. So P.S. what happens? Well, in the late 90s, when the Internet 1.0 was going strong and the stock market was going crazy, Jim took some of the money he made and he started to invest. And he was getting extraordinary returns, sometimes as much as 10 or 20 or 30% in a month. He was doing leverage types of investments, a lot of options, and just making a fortune on the side, not out of his business, just from his investments. And so his sister-in-law pulled him aside and said, look, you got to take our money and invest it for us. And Jim said, well, look, I'm not a professional investor. He said, I'm doing well right now, but I wouldn't want to invest your money. What if I lost the money? She said, you're not losing money. You're making a fortune. We could never make this kind of money. He said, well, I have, a stockbroker. I could turn you over to him. They said, no. You're making the decisions. Please do this for us. So framed as a gift, as a contribution, this appealed to Jim. So he said, okay, he got to be the hero. So he took all of this money and he invested in it, and they succeeded. So then they wanted to give him more until he pretty much had given Jim their entire nest egg. Jim, of course, put it right beside his own investments. He didn't do anything differently. He didn't touch that money for himself. And then one day, all hell broke loose. And what happened? Well, when Jim told me the story, he looked like a crushed soul. He's bawling uncontrollably, crying. What occurred? Well, Jim said, I was gone busy on my business for 3 or 4 days. And he said, I told my stockbroker that we needed to start taking some off the table and being a bit more conservative. And he said, but he felt really confident, so he put me in 7 positions. And he said they were all option positions. Now, if you're not familiar with options, if you buy stock and the company goes to zero, you lose all your money. But if you buy options and the stock goes down, you don't just lose your money, you end up owing money. And in one day, he wiped out everything Jim had accumulated in his lifetime, all of his investments, all of his cash, and worst of all of the money that he'd been investing that came from his sister-in-law. Now, you can only imagine Jim's fear and anxiety and frustration and insanity that he was feeling inside. And so, long story shortened, it got to the point where Jim lost everything. He lost his business. He lost his home. He went through a divorce. I mean, it was the worst experience he could ever dream of his life. Completely broken. He had no way to contribute economically anymore to the Handicapped Association. And so when I met Jim, he had finally figured out a plan. He hadn't told anybody, but it got uncovered. What was his plan? Oh, different than Bob's. He wasn't going to kill his kids or anything of that nature. He was going to kill himself. Why? Not only because he felt broken, but because he felt like he couldn't solve this. Remember, when your life conditions don't equal your blueprint, and you feel like you have no control to make it better, when you feel helpless, people suffer. And his suffering got so bad that he decided the way to make an ultimate contribution would be to sacrifice his life. As I dug in with him on this, and you can watch this on film as it unfolds live if you ever want to see this, interestingly enough, his belief system was, I have an insurance policy. So while I'll be dead, my sister-in-law will finally have her life savings back, everyone else will be taken care of, and instead of being a failure in life, my life will have served. Well, as I brought back to Jim and began to refocus him, I said, Jim, can you imagine what this would do to your sister-in-law for her to feel that you took your own life, that you somehow thought that money was more important to her than you? And he said, look, I know I'm important to her. He said, but frankly, at this stage, the money's even more important. And you could see in his face all the pain of what people had said to him and how they felt like he had failed them and how they blamed him. And so almost nothing I could do, even though I understood his world, I hadn't found the way to leverage him. I thought, caring for his family, the hurt that his mother would feel to know that he died and killed himself, the hurt that he would do to other people. None of that was enough because his pain in the moment of feeling like he'd not contributed and he'd hurt everybody was much worse than maybe they'll feel bad when I die in his mind. I wasn't able to find leverage until one point in time where I had to make change a must for him, where he couldn't use this plan. I looked at him and I said, well, frankly, Jim, if you're going to be so selfish that all you're going to focus is on how to meet your needs so you can feel significant by dying and not caring about what it does to your mother or anybody else, and you're going to rationalize escaping your pain by killing yourself, I said, you know what? I don't know what happens on the other side to anybody, and I don't know what you believe. Whatever you believe, who knows what happens to someone who takes their own life? But I said, I know one thing. I said, if you do it, no money's going to be paid. And he looked at me in shock and said, what do you mean? I have a life insurance policy. I said, I know. But I said, every life insurance policy has a clause. In that clause, if you take your life deliberately, there is no payout. And I said, you're on videotape right now. This entire session is being filmed. And I said, if you go take your life, I'm going to send the videotape to the insurance company and no one's going to get a dime. And the look on his face, I mean, he was ready to explode. He said, well, you, I don't give you the right to do that. I said, well, I don't really think you have any authority over me, do you? And there was this moment, this intense moment where the leverage was there and I deployed it and he had no choice. We just wiped it out. If he goes and takes his life, he doesn't accomplish any of his needs. His life is not significant. No one's taken care of. It's over, baby. You're going to have to sit here and face the music and find a better alternative. So sometimes leverage is physical. Sometimes leverage is, people will do things for others they care about that they'll never do for themselves. Everyone has different leverage. That's why understanding the world is so important. I remember I worked one time with a woman who was in such bad shape. She had these physical intestinal problems. She was stressed all the time. She was in a marriage where she was so unhappy. And I got her to see where the problems were and the changes she had to make and her beliefs and her blueprint. But she kept saying to me, I can't do it. I can't do it. So I kept looking for leverage. And I knew that this woman was, totally committed to health. She was a raw fooder, but she was ill all the time because you can eat perfectly. And if you sit around being stressed all the time, nothing digests right. Nothing assimilates. You're not healthy. And I knew the love of her life was her daughter. She didn't have love with her husband, but boy, she loved her daughter. So I went to her and I said, look, if you continue down this line, how old do you think a person who thinks this way, who acts this way, who believes the things you believe, how long do you think they'll live to be? And she told me an age. I don't remember the age, but it was about 4 or 5 years older than she was right then. And I thought, now she's going to change. She's associated to the fact that if I don't change, I'm going to die. She goes, I still can't change. I said, okay, I got to pull out the big leverage. I have a belief system that says, I'll do whatever it takes to help someone break their pattern, help them change. I'll look for it because my view is if, you really love somebody and you care for them and you find out that they're in a burning building, would you just say, gosh, I hope they get out? I mean, if you care about them, you'd find a way to burst up there and wake them up, assuming they're asleep in the building. And what if you go to the door and the building's burning and you bang on the door and they're one of those kind of people that sleeps real heavy? Would you go, well, gosh, I gave it my best shot. I mean, I banged on the door and then leave? Of course not. What would you do if you really love that person and they're in a burning building and they're asleep in that room? You kick the door down. You do whatever it takes. You get help. What if you knock the door down and now you're going to help this person and they're one of those kind of people that doesn't wake up real well? My little sister was like that. You woke her up in the morning, it was a dangerous sport. You might get punched, hit. It was not a good thing. So what if you try to wake them up and a person tries to hurt you? You go, fine, I tried to help them. They're smacking me, fine, they're just going to burn. Of course not. If you love them, you knock them on the head if you have to. Knock them out, put them on your back, and drag them out of the building, because sooner or later, what's going to happen? One day they're going to wake up and go, thank you. They're going to get out of the building and say, oh my God, you saved my life. Well, I'm willing to do anything. So I know sometimes the only reason people haven't changed is you haven't found strong enough leverage. If you've been trying to get yourself to do something, yeah, you want to change for one reason, but hey, it meets some of your other needs. Leverage is the key. You need more leverage. You need to change a muscle. I thought, okay, I got to bring out the big guns. So I said to her, Lisa was her name. I said, Lisa, if you continue this way, then you believe you'll die in a few years? She goes, I know. I didn't tell her she'd die. She said it. I'd never say to someone, you're going to die if you keep this up. I don't think anybody has the right to do that. Nobody knows. But she said it. So if she said it's true to her. So I said, well, okay. And you can't change, huh? She goes, I can't change. It's just the way it is. I said, well, then when you die and your daughter is carrying your body, she's one of the pallbearers, will she hate you knowing you could have changed and didn't, or will she just forget you? Ooh, I thought, oh man, I hate doing this, but got to do whatever it takes, right? You got to step in. And there's this long pause, and she started to cry, and I thought, okay, now she'll do whatever it takes to change. Because once it's a must, we find the way. So I thought at this point, man, I got Lisa. She's crying. She's going to change. We got the leverage here. But guess what? She goes, I know, but I still can't change. I can't do it. I can't. She's crying. And I had this moment in my head, I'll never forget. I thought, oh my God, this woman's never going to change. And I have this simple belief that if you're going to be an effective leader, an effective therapist, an effective friend or parent, you can't ever buy into the fact that you can't help this person. If you entertain that thought, you're not going to reach them. You're not going to help them. So I said, that's bull. There's always a way. That's my belief. There's always a way to reach somebody. There's leverage in everybody. You just got to find what it is. So I took a breath in for a moment. I thought, my God, there's got to be a way. And then I got it. This woman's a raw fooder. There's nothing she's more militant about is her food and her diet. So I said, I just wonder, do you think her new mom will be a meat eater? I swear to you, it was like this woman was put a rocket in her butt. Her face exploded. She goes, what? How dare it? And now she's ready to change. She's willing to let herself die. She's willing to let her kid carry the coffin, but she ain't willing to have her kid have a mother that's a meat eater. I draw the line at that. Everybody's got leverage somewhere. All you got to do is find it, but you won't find that leverage unless you do step one really well. You understand and appreciate their world. See, if I didn't know she was a raw fooder, and I didn't know how militant she was on that, I never would have come up with that idea. The craziest things can change someone. Sometimes leverage is physical. Years ago, there used to be an organization that used to do the Stop Smoking Clinic. It was called the Schick Center. And I don't know if you remember them or not, if you're old enough to remember that. And they used to have this session where they proved they gave you a guarantee you'd stop smoking. You know how they did it? They put these electrodes on your face, and they would shock you every time you reached for a cigarette. Well, you get enough physical leverage like that, you can change just about anybody. But the problem is these people stopped smoking and started eating or started doing something else because they hadn't found a way to meet the need. The cigarettes made them feel comfortable. They're certain. Gave them variety. Gave them connection. They needed a better way to do it. That's the value of 6 human needs. Okay, so step one, what is it? You got it. Understand and appreciate their world. Create a base of relationship. Make sure they know you're not analyzing you're there to help. 2, get leverage. Find that tipping point. Find what it is that's going to make change, not something they're talking about, they want to do, they should do, that's going to make it a must for them. And what will make that happen? If they link up. Failing to change now means immediate, massive, unbearable pain in their world, and changing now could mean amazing, extraordinary, immediate pleasure. And the reason I say immediate is if it's going to be pleasure 10 years from now or pain 10 years from now, well, who knows what the future will have. You got to make it immediate. That's what I did. I took the future for Lisa and brought it forward. The same thing with Jim. I took the future and I took away his ability to make it happen. I leveraged him.
This session continues on the next CD.
What's the third of the 7 master steps? Number 3. Are you still with me? Good. You have to interrupt that person's pattern. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, think about it. Remember I said, if you know what people want and need, then all you have to do is figure out what's stopping them. What's stopping them is a pattern. It's a pattern of emotion. And whatever they're feeling is coming from a meaning they have. And that's coming from the way they're using their body, the way they're focusing, the language they use, the beliefs they have, right? That's what's shaping them. So we have to break the pattern. Now, I'll tell you a technique that I used when I did a lot of one-on-one therapy when I started my Impossibles practice. At the time, I just purchased a really wonderful home. It was called the Del Mar Castle. It was in Del Mar, California. And it was built from castles in Europe. And I was so proud to have this home. It was overlooking the ocean on the front, and it had this 3-story turret that I used to go up to on the outside and look down on the ocean on one side and over the mountains up the back side of the house. And I just loved it. And so I used to do private therapies there. And it was wonderful. People would fly in because they had this impossible challenge they worked on in therapists for years. And so now I was going to be their final approach because I guaranteed the result in one session. So they'd fly in and I would see them when they drove up the driveway because I'd be up on the 3rd story in the turret. And, when you came out of their car, they'd look at this house. It was a really neat place, very different. And, usually people would be curious or interested or think the house was really beautiful. And then my assistant would bring them up this winding stairway that went up all 3 stories to the top to where I was. And so, the person's focusing on things that are different, right? And what you focus on, you feel. They're feeling pretty good, probably. This is interesting. It's different. Their physiology, they're walking around, they're feeling good, right? Whatever language, they're curious. They're asking my assistant about pictures on the wall or about the house or where it come from or how it was built or how old it was. Just interesting things. So they're in a certain state. They come up, shake my hand, and then they'd sit down in the chair. And they'd say, well, I'm here because, and then they'd go into their pattern. They'd start to cry and talk about this was going on. And I'd wait just a few seconds till they really started to get into it. And all of a sudden I'd say, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I'd yell at them literally like this. And they'd jump. I said, we haven't started yet. How dare you? I haven't started. I haven't even asked you the questions yet. And then he'd go, oh, I'm sorry. And it was funny. This person who thinks they're out of control, the minute it wasn't appropriate, they knew how to change their pattern. It's like, have you ever been in the middle of a fight and you're arguing back and forth and then the phone rings and then the person who was just, and they pick up the phone, hello? And they're in a totally different state. They know how to change their state when they have to, when it's a must, when there's some leverage. That phone coming in is leverage. Get it? I'll tell you what I do to get leverage on that person. I interrupt their pattern, but I'll go back a step. They'd sit down, and I would, have done my homework on them in advance. I knew a lot about them, but they'd sit down, and as they're starting to do this, and they'd start to go in their state, I'd break their pattern, and I'd say, listen, I need to understand and appreciate more about what's going on with you. And when I was looking to get leverage, I did a couple of things. I would go in, and I would ask the person, I would say, look, I'm guaranteeing you a result here. And the result I'm guaranteeing you is in one session, we're going to create this change that you've been, struggling with for this, 7 years, 10 years? What is it? And they tell me. I'd say, I don't take clients that aren't totally committed to changing. I don't waste my time. So before we begin, you got to convince me, before we start the session, that we're going to have this session. That you truly are going to change. And they look at me like, are you crazy? I'd say, look, because I don't take clients that aren't going to change. And this person has flown from, let's say, New York to California, and they've rented a car, and they've come here. I got some leverage on their tail now. Do you follow me? And so now they got to convince me all the reasons. And you know what? Leverage comes from reasons. If you got strong enough reasons, you can change anything. Think about it. If you got a big enough why, you can figure out how to do just about anything in this world. So I'd get them to give me all these reasons. And the other way I'd get leverage is while they were there, I'd say, can you tell me a time in your life when you felt unstoppable? Can you tell me an area where you really felt successful? Can you tell me about a place where you broke through in a different area? And while they're doing this, I would create what's known as an anchor, a trigger, a conditioning tool that later on, if I needed to bring them back into a strong state, I had that leverage. I had a base to get them in a strong state with, and I had leverage to create change. I knew why change was a must for them, and I knew what state to put them in to get them strong. But as I went back to step 3, interrupting the pattern is so critical. I mean, I'll give you the most simplistic version of this. Have you ever had a situation where maybe you're feeling frustrated or upset and you had some obnoxious uncle or friend or somebody that kept interrupting you, and pretty soon they got you laughing. You didn't want to laugh, like you're crying or you're upset, and they kept breaking your pattern. They kept just interrupting you, and like you want to be upset. But you know what? If you interrupt somebody's pattern enough, they can't stay there anymore. Has that ever happened to you growing up or with a friend? I mean, think of it this way. We're all creatures of patterns. For you to be angry, you have to go to a certain way of using your body and your face, don't you? You have to focus on certain things to be angry in a certain way. You have to use a certain tone of voice, a certain language pattern to be angry. It's a different pattern than for you to be playful. There's a different tone of voice, isn't there? A different posture, a different gesture. Do you use your face different when you're being playful? Of course you do. Do you focus on things differently when you're playful? Of course you do. Is there different language patterns of what you say or how you say it when you're in a playful state? Of course. So whatever people want to change, they want to move from a state they don't like to a state they do want. They might say, I want to stop smoking, or I want to lose weight, or I want to whatever. But they only want to stop smoking or lose weight because they think it's going to lead to a feeling. That if I stop smoking, then, I'll feel better, I'll have more health or more energy. Or if I lose weight, then I'll be more attractive to other people. That's a feeling. So my view is all change is changing feelings, changing the pattern of emotion. To do that, all I got to do is break up the pattern of meaning. Break up those 3 molders of meaning, what you do with your body, what you do with your focus, what you do with your language. If I want to make a long-term change, I just got to change your blueprint a bit. And the only way you're going to change it is if you, number 1, understand their world. Number 2, you got lots of leverage, where change is a must. And number 3, keep breaking the old pattern. Here's the principle. Listen to me now and hear this. The biggest reason people fail to change, other than not having enough leverage, is that they try to create a new pattern before they first interrupt the old pattern. Here's what I mean. If you want to get yourself to stop smoking, you're going to have to replace smoking with something else. But first, you got to make it difficult to smoke. You got to break that pattern. It's so ingrained in your nervous system. So think of it this way. When you get in the habit, I used to bite my fingernails, but it was an unconscious habit. And I did it no matter what. It kept coming up. I even wanted to change it because it was ugly. It was terrible. And I would get it where I'd bite all my fingernails off and there was nothing left. And I'd still bite unconsciously. And I'd end up getting those where you bite the quick and it would bleed and then it would heal back. And I have like these little scabs. I mean, it was horrible. So, I went to the store and I went to the pharmacy and they had the stuff you could put on your fingernails that if you brought it up to your mouth, it tasted horrible. So that would supposedly break the pattern. I still did it. That's how bad it was. But what changed my life was one day I got enough leverage. I saw this woman. I was starting a new business with her. She was a client, and it was early in my career. I was working for this company in marketing, and she was the buyer on the other side. And I'll never forget. I thought when I walked in that day, this woman is beautiful. I mean, physically, mentally, emotionally. She had this angelic feel about her and very, very sexy lady. And I thought, man, I'd like to make 2 sales today. One is the product and the other is me. I want to connect with this woman. I was, whatever age, 19, 20 years old, whatever it was. And so sure enough, everything's going well on both sales, it looks like, as we went through the lunchtime. And at the end, I said, what do you think? And she said, absolutely, let's do it. And she wanted the product, so I went to go hand her the contract. I'll never forget. She grabbed my hand. I pulled it back instinctively, and she goes, what is that? Let me see your hands. And I was like, oh, what? She goes, let me see your hands. And so I brought my hands out, and she saw my fingernails, and she said, that is disgusting. I said, well, I just kind of have this habit of biting my fingernails, and it's just a bad habit. She goes, no, that's not just a bad habit. That is disgusting. She said, I could never do business with a person with that little discipline. And she got up and she stormed out. And I thought, that woman is not an angel. I think I thought something much more harsh than that, actually, but that will be my coded way of describing it to you. All I can tell you is, it bugged me, though, because, man, she was leverage, man. I really wanted her, and this stupid pattern of biting my fingernails is getting in the way. Nothing had leveraged me like that before. I said, you know what? This fingernail thing is done. You know, I'm finding a way. I got higher value, connection and love, baby, right? So, sure enough, man, I got all these different books out, and I found this conditioning tool called a swish pattern. I'll never forget. And what I did is I saw my fingers coming up to my mouth, and then physically I would pull it back. I would snap it back, and then I would see myself as this successful person as I snapped it back. I would link these positive feelings. In those days, you know, I was a kid, so I grew up poor, so I thought, okay, successful. I got this cool suit on and a nice watch and ring, and I am the man, or some stupid thing like that, whatever my model of the world was back then at 19. And so sure enough, I did it like 20 times. Like train the brain. See this? Boom, do that. See this? Boom, do that. And I did it over and over again. It was a conditioning technique. Standard Skinner kind of stuff. And I'll never forget from this movie, and it's a really intense movie, and, you know, I really get into movies, and sure enough, next thing I know, my fingers are at my lips, and I'm about to bite down. But instead of going, this stuff doesn't work, I just realized, you know what I got to do? I got to condition it some more. And so I did. I did it a bunch more times. I don't know. For the next 5 days, maybe I did 20, 25 of these little swish patterns again and again. And then I've never touched my fingernails again. Now, things didn't quite work out perfectly with the girl, but you know what? It served its purpose. It gave me leverage, and it broke my pattern. I mean, when she looked at my fingers and said, that is disgusting, she got leverage on me and broke my pattern simultaneously. Does that make sense? Now, when you scratch the old pattern out, when you break it, you're open to something new. See, that's the only way it's going to happen. You're not going to change things without breaking the old pattern. Think of it like a record. I use this example a lot. I'll repeat it, I'm sure, tomorrow and the next day, because this is it. Most people today have their music digitally, but in the good old days, we used to get it on CDs, or if you're really ancient, vinyl LPs. Ooh. And you know what's interesting? Think about this. Why every time you listen to a CD do you hear the same music? Because there's a pattern on there. A pattern that when the laser goes across it, it triggers the same response every time. If I try to put a new CD in, a new thought, a new belief, a new feeling, a new kind of music in your head, and I try to put on top of a CD that's already there, I'm not going to influence you. I'm not going to create any change. But if I take out your old CD and take out a needle, scratch it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth 100 times, you put that CD in, it's never going to play the same way again. Just like your uncle grabbing it, making you crazy, or making you laugh when you didn't want to. After a while, you can't go back to the old pattern. That's a critical tool. There are many ways to break people's patterns. You can break their pattern physically. Suddenly you tease them, tickle them, kiss them, water gets dropped on somebody. Somebody is all depressed and you drop water on them. I promise you, they won't be depressed anymore. They get angry, they get excited, but something's going to change. You can break the pattern of their focus. They keep focusing on the past. You take them to the future and create a new view. I remember one time in my life, I was in this horrible place, and one of my dear friends told me, I'll never forget, he said, Tony, you think this problem will never go away. But he said, you're wrong. You know, there'll be a few years from now, you'll be on this stuff. He said, you'll be here, you'll be married, you'll be with this woman you totally love. He said, we'll be together and we'll talk about these days and how crazy and difficult it seemed. And he broke my pattern. He got me to change my focus to the future instead of thinking this moment is forever. Because when people are in pain, they think that, don't they? Or you can change people's language. You know, somebody says, oh, this is the worst thing that ever happened. I remember this one woman was talking to me one time, and I was doing therapy on her. She's a very famous lady, and she was overseas and completely depressed and unable to eat and going through all these things. And, you know, I understood where she was. And at one point, I just said, you know what? You need to do something different here. We need an alternative to your old language pattern here. I'm going to give you something else to say. And I broke her pattern completely. I said, here's what I want you to do. Next time you start to feel depressed and you start saying no one loves me and my career is in shambles because I haven't made a movie in 3 years and all this stuff, I said, I want you to do this. You're hanging out on the beach. You're talking to me by phone from where? From Cannes, from the south of France. Okay, so here's what I want you to repeat. I want you to do this 20 times a day. Thank God I'm not a cockroach in Bulgaria. And, you know, just did something stupid. Come on, say it. Thank God I'm not a cockroach in Bulgaria. All I did was keep changing her phrase, and I kept her saying, say it louder. Thank God I'm not a cockroach. She's like, what are you talking about? I said, it doesn't matter. Keep saying it. And what it did is it changed her language. It changed her focus. It changed her body. It broke her pattern. Right? It shifted it all. Now, this sets up the fourth step. If you understand and appreciate their world, if you found leverage, you've interrupted the pattern, then the fourth step is really simple. Define the problem in solvable terms. Define the problem in solvable terms. I'll give you a perfect example. Let's go back to Bob. Bob's problem was he's worthless. He says, I failed completely as a father. There's no reason for me to be here. And I can't let my kids suffer by knowing, to be scarred for life knowing the father was like this. And I said, Bob, you're not a failure as a father. I said, you're just living your life in the most boring way possible. You need to drive your darn Harley. You need to be yourself. Here's your problem, Bob. You're not being yourself. You're trying to be somebody you're not, which makes anybody miserable. You're trying to be this ultra-responsible, conservative guy that only lives his life in this tiny little band of what is supposed to be by cultural terms. I said, forget all that. You're a Harley rider. You love to boogie, right? You love to make love to your wife, right? I said, what you got to do is really the easiest thing on earth, Bob. You don't have a problem. Your problem you're defining as impossible. It isn't that you're worthless. It's that you've been boring. Get back to yourself. And Bob had this huge smile on his face, man. He started thinking about it. I said, Bob, I want you to close your eyes. And I'll give you a sneak peek of the fifth step because I'm kind of leading into it, even though we're not done with number 4 yet. I helped him create an empowering alternative. I said, Bob, I want you to close your eyes. And I said, I want you now to imagine a life where the way you start your day is you get up in the morning and you kiss your kids in the head and you say, I'll be back in a bit, and you get on your Harley. I said, you dust that sucker off and you go out there and you rock between, where do you live? Between the mountains, describe it. He described where he was. And I said, I want you to imagine, there you are, just you with the wind in your hair and the road in front of you. And Bob's face was one giant grin. It was just this giant grin. And I said, I want you to imagine you go on this ride and you come home and the kids have gone off to school and you grab your lady, your woman, and you say, get over here. And I said, you make the most passionate love to her like you never have before, like every bit of you that's been waiting to feel alive again is there. Now, Bob, he's got a little move in his step, and he looks like a totally different guy. And then all of a sudden I said, and while we're doing this, I pointed the guy in the back and I motioned to him and I wrote on a little piece of paper and he put on this music, Born to be Wild. And then Bob was listening to this, Born to be Wild. And Bob, you can see him, he's on his Harley in his head, and he's making love to his woman. And I said, now, I want you to imagine how alive you feel. And what do you tell your kids life's about? And he said, life is about love. Life is about freedom. Life is about living life on your terms. Life's not about settling. And he went off on this rant. And the crowd is just cheering. And they're like, go, Bob, go. It was just, you got people from all these countries, and Bob is like the star now, And pretty soon the music's still going and some women jumped on stage and started dancing around Bob. And Bob was the star, baby. And by the end, he was just vibrating. And Bob got there's an empowering alternative to the old way of dealing with this situation. There's a better way to meet my needs than killing myself and killing my kids. And I dug in even deeper with Bob. And I said, what could be more important, whether you're at work or not, than to spend time with your kids and let them know how much you love them? Isn't that what you're afraid would happen if you got killed or if you killed yourself? I said, what could you do to go home and be with them each day so that if anything ever did happen to you, not because you killed yourself, but if anything did happen to you, that, man, they would know forever that they're the most loved children in the world. And Bob came up with his whole plan, his whole strategy, lit up like a Christmas tree. And by the way, that led him into step 6. I might as well give it to you, which is we condition Bob, right? Step 6 is once you've been in a position where the problem's solvable, it's not that you're a bad person. It's not that you're worthless. It's that you're scared. It's that you're bored. It's that you're trying to be something you're not. Those are things you can change in a heartbeat. You can go back to being yourself. And once you create an empowering alternative, like my friend telling me, this is not going to last forever. He broke my pattern and simultaneously said, look, a year from now, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, we'll be sitting here having dinner and you're going to be so happy with your wife and your kid. And he brought tears to my eyes. What did he do? He broke my pattern. He gave me something to look forward to. He defined the problem that it was solvable. It wasn't forever. And simultaneously, he gave me an alternative future. He gave me something that was more compelling. And he talked about it with such passion and so believable that I started thinking about it. And the more I thought about it, the more it felt alive until pretty soon it became my new habit. And it changed me. Same thing with Bob. We conditioned him. And then we related it, step 7, to a higher purpose. We related to what Bob believes. Bob loves his children, ironically. That's the irony. He would do anything for his kids. And he felt like such a failure. That's why he didn't want him to suffer. So now I get him to see, I get him associated that the most important thing he can do is be there for his kids regardless of his work. And now the environment will reinforce him. Now I know I ran through steps 4, 5, 6, and 7 quickly. We'll go back and fill in some more depth, but I wanted you to give a sense of this. Now let's go back to Jim. I used the same process with him. I got him to see that the problem was not that he had to die. The problem was not unsolvable, that he had to go off and pay off all this money, and that was impossible. What I got him to see that the real problem was that he'd lost his sense of identity. That his identity was he was the person that was always giving, and he was no longer able to do that. And I got him to see it's not true. I said, if you stick with it in this life, you can still make a difference in people's lives. You can make a difference with your personality, with your presence, with your love, with volunteering your time. And I said, if you stay here and you have no choice now, because I got the leverage, I'm going to send this videotape to the insurance company, so you can't pay it off. If you're committed to paying this off, you got to work. You got to find a new job, create a new future. And I said, listen, every great movie, every great story has a second act. You know what? It all is going great, and then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. And the main character, it looks like there's no way to turn it around. But everybody loves a comeback kid. Everybody loves somebody who can make it. And they didn't just succeed. They went through hell and got stronger, better, and more. I said, all of this has happened in your life for one reason, so that you could become more, so you could give more. I said, you come through this, it's going to make you the strongest you've ever been. It's like the old silly metaphor, but it's true. When somebody breaks a bone, what happens? Where the bone heals becomes the strongest part of that bone. I said, that's what you got to give. So I redefined it from it's impossible to turn this around because I don't have the money to it's solvable. Start making contributions now. Start making the difference now. You don't have to wait till you have money to do it. It's just a change in your identity. You can get your identity back by starting to give again. You can be a contributor again. And I began to paint alternative ways to deal with it and began to reinforce it. And I did a process to condition him. And sure enough, related to what he values. And by the way, if you watch the film, you'll see an interview with Jim 2 years later. And you see Jim, the happiest he's ever been in his life, no possibility of suicide. And he talks about the people who he's helped because he lived. He got in a business where he was helping people that were losing their homes, ironically. And so he worked with a company that had capital, and they go help them to keep from losing their homes. And they make a loan to them and turn them around. You know, one woman in particular who told me the story about who was in her 70s, and she let him know, and she got his letter, and it was the same day they're supposed to foreclose. And there was no way to make the deal happen. But Jim figured it out. And he saved her life savings. And I said to him, Jim, do you realize if you would have killed yourself, that woman would have lost everything? And what an unbelievable gift. And he started crying, I started crying. It was beautiful. Change happens when you take these steps, when you understand their world, when you get enough leverage, when you interrupt the pattern that's limiting them, the pattern of focus, the pattern of meaning, the pattern of language, the pattern in their body. When you interrupt it enough, over and over and over again, it's impossible to get back to. When you really get a person in a position where you help them to define the problem in solvable terms, somebody's depressed, you say, no, you're not depressed, you're bored. You know, of course you feel what you call depression, but you're just bored with your life. You redefine it. When you redefine it in solvable terms, then you go to that fifth step. You come up with an alternative. I mean, I'll give you an example. All change really is bringing resources to a place they're not. What do I mean by that? Well, an empowering thought, an empowering belief system, an empowering feeling. Think of your own life. Think of one of the toughest situations you've ever faced in your life that somehow you eventually made it through it. Can you think of one? Think of you, for example. What's one of the toughest situations you faced in your life, and what pulled you through? Maybe to help you do this, I'll grab somebody here in the room and put them on the spot here because I'm obviously in the studio. Laura, tell me, grab that microphone so I can have a real-life example. Spontaneous, give me the truth. What's one of the toughest situations that you've faced in your life, and what belief or one thought or what action, what pulled you through?
I would say breaking up with a boyfriend that I thought I was going to marry. And I think the belief that definitely pulled me through is if he was the right one, it would be meant to be.
Now, how soon did you get that belief? Or did you suffer for a while first?
Probably about 2 or 3 days of being really sad and then just kind of being at peace with it and spending time with friends and family. And, you know, it was a few months till I was truly, truly at peace with it, but it helped pretty much right away.
Now notice, what was the meaning when you were in the most pain? What do you think the meaning was? What was the pattern then? This was not something you expected to have happen, I guess? How long had you been dating?
Less than a year.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I knew that something was off, and I just thought it would get better, and then I realized it wasn't. So I think I was being a little too hopeful.
Yes. Optimistic. And you ever notice how optimistic we get when we're afraid of losing something? Very often it's counterintuitive. Like we want to reassure ourselves enough because we want that certainty. So when you got that belief system, and that belief system says it wasn't meant to be, basically, is that the essence of it? It reassured you, I guess. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was an alternative way. That was an empowering alternative for you. And today, now that you look back on it, what do you believe today?
I definitely believe that God just did not want us together, and it was the best thing that could have happened.
What a beautiful thing. Now, without that belief, you would have suffered. And some people will go on and on because they'll hang on to that belief that I missed out on the one relationship I could have had, the person that was designed for me. And so they'll say, my life conditions don't match my blueprint. They never will because I missed that person and stay in pain. You made the shift. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And by the way, these are the same 7 steps if you're looking to create a change in a business environment or even a culture. If you look at Apple computers, there was a guy there named Steve Jobs who really understood and appreciated the world of customers. He created some products initially, literally out of his garage with his partner, Steve Wozniak, and they went to the top. And he created some products that became cultural icons, the Mac. And then at one point, he got stuck. He got in a position where the business wasn't growing. He had to learn some lessons. He left the business. But the transformation of Apple in the last decade or so has been so dramatic. And the transformations that have occurred have shown up in many ways. They were the iPod. They were the changing of the Mac in terms of the way its look and its feel, the anticipation of a different operating system. But I'll tell you something else he did. He broke people's patterns. Here's a guy that understood and appreciated the customer's world. He was always finding leverage to get people to come up with something better, where better wasn't a should, it was an absolute must. Constantly breaking every pattern that people have thought of what was possible. That's one of his great skills. He's constantly defining the problem in solvable terms. Look, here's all we need to do. Here's what we're going to create for people. We're going to find a solution. We're going to create the iPhone. We're going to integrate everything. It's really simple. All we're going to do is take 3 things that already exist. The phone, the iPod, and the internet connection. We're going to put them on one device for everybody. What does he do? He breaks the pattern. He comes up with a problem that's solvable, and he comes up with alternatives that are totally empowering. And then he conditions people. He conditions the media. He conditions everyone. The stock price of Apple, when they announced the iPhone, it wasn't even out. It was just him conditioning people. This is going to be the greatest program in the world. No one had seen an actual iPhone in the world, but it was written up everywhere. Built this anticipation, and he got people so excited about it that now he's got a business that's, again, another gigantic victory for Apple. And, they have a clear purpose. Their job is to constantly make it simpler, better, the very best that exists. So this is true of anything. If you look at changes that happen in a culture, you can look at any one of these steps, and you can see somebody like Nelson Mandela. What an unbelievable soul. Had the privilege of spending time with him many years ago, and of all the people I've ever met in my life, he's got to be in the top 1 or 2 or 3, along with maybe Mother Teresa and maybe a few other people in my life that I would say I respect the most. I mean, can you imagine someone stealing a quarter of a century of your life away from you, putting you behind bars when you've done nothing wrong, and you not wanting to kill everybody? I mean, here's an amazing soul. And what's interesting? Look at how he did it. When he was in jail, what was he doing? I asked him, I actually made the stupid mistake. I didn't realize at the time when I first met him, I was trying to think, what would I really like to know from him? And so I said, Mr. Mandela, I said, tell me, how did you survive all those years in jail? And oh my God, this guy, he's a big man. You could see him rise up and he had this look of disdain on his face looking at me. And I'm thinking, what did I say? And he said, I didn't survive. I prepared. I mean, I got chills remembering it right now. I mean, he said it with such authority. While he was in jail, he believed he needed to prepare himself to be a leader. And that 1 of 2 things would happen. Either he would be able to lead his people, and in order to do that, he knew he had to be able to reach out to the white leaders of apartheid. He had to understand them. He had to be able to communicate with them. So he studied Afrikaans. He literally learned the language of the people that imprisoned him while he was in prison. He was reading constantly, preparing himself, because he said, I'm either going to lead my people or I'm going to die in jail, and my death will spur on a total transformation, a revolution in my country, one or the other. I mean, what an unbelievable mindset. And then what did he do? He found a way to get leverage. The leverage is they kept coming to him and saying, listen, we'll release you if you just promise not to say anything. And of course he said no. And his being locked up in jail became the leverage where people got more and more upset around the world. How did he break patterns? First acts he did when he got out of jail. It was an amazing experience. I had the privilege of actually going out to that island where he was held. It was quite an experience. But when he got out of jail, the first thing he did is he put on the jersey of Springboks. It was the symbol for every black South African of everything that was wrong with society, the white supremacy. And he wore the jersey as if it was his own. What a gutsy move. Talk about breaking people's patterns. And how about when all of a sudden he's starting to talk to people he's negotiating with and they don't think he understands Afrikaans and he's speaking in their language. I mean, this is the way change happens in a culture, not just with an individual. And he defined the problem in solvable terms. He said, if not black, white. He said, there are many white people that are amazing and there are many black people that are mean and vice versa. He actually used the tool to help people begin to look at people from what they valued and what they believed instead of the colors of their skin. It's something you may be familiar with called spiral dynamics. I won't go into that now, obviously. Fifthly, he kept creating alternatives. Where people thought there was no way they could live together, he came up with those alternatives. And he reinforced and conditioned it by his example. Everywhere he could, he broke patterns where violence were occurring, and he brought it to a higher purpose, the higher purpose of the humanity of everyone there. He changed a culture, he changed a world. There are still many challenges there, don't get me wrong. But things that were thought to be impossible became possible because of a man who understood these 7 steps. He may not have called it the 7 master steps, but I guarantee if you look at his life, he did it. Rosa Parks broke everybody's pattern when she said, no, I won't go up to the back of the bus. Think of all the historic examples. Think of all the examples of anyone who's ever led, and I guarantee you'll find one or more of these 7 steps. If you apply each of the 7 steps, you're going to get results that are extraordinary. So just to catch up on number 5, creating an empowering alternative, just to go a little deeper for a moment, think of it this way. People need a new way of thinking, a new way of focusing, a new physiology, a new emotion, a new meaning, a new belief. If you bring a new one to a situation, everything changes. Lou Ferrigno is a very famous guy. He played the Hulk, but he was, an amazing bodybuilder. And Lou came to me at one point because he wanted to do public speaking, but he had a bit of a speech impediment. And so he was scared. He didn't know what to do. And here's this monster of a man. I mean, muscles as big as you can imagine, can run through a wall, so intense. But public speaking, and his knees start to shake. We all have a place. I don't care who you are, where we get scared, where we get fearful, where we get angry. We need to bring resources to that place. So all you got to do is go, Lou, I want you to remember an intense time in your life. I want you to go back to that time where you felt unstoppable. And he could come up with sports environments, breaking through, lifting weights. And you take that feeling and you bring that to public speaking and you link it to his body. So as he's speaking publicly, he feels like he's the bodybuilder. Now it's a piece of cake and Lou's speaking great. I didn't even do the work. I passed it on to a friend of mine who understood the principles. One of my coaches, I said, take care of him. It was handled in short order. So there's all kinds of ways to create empowering alternatives. The conditioning, though, step 6 is so critical. And we're going to talk about this in more depth later on, but here's what I want you to know. Any thought, any feeling, any behavior that is consistently reinforced will eventually become a habit. I'll say that again. Any thought, any feeling, any belief, any behavior that gets reinforced consistently will become habit. It will become automatic for us. My daughter, for example, I'll never forget, there was a time when she was very young. She was, 17, 18 years old. And she had one of her early boyfriends. And she was really in love with him. I mean, head over heels in love with him. And sure enough, there was a time in which, he was supposed to call or supposed to come by. I don't remember which. And he didn't call or come by. And she kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And she got more and more and more upset. And then finally, I think he called in and she just cut loose on him. I can't believe that you didn't even call me. You don't even care. And went on and on and on with this really negative meaning she had. Now, interestingly enough, I pulled her aside afterwards and I said, Jolie, I know you're disappointed he didn't call. But, you're assuming he didn't care. You're making a lot of assumptions that will make him feel horrible. He may have cared. He may have just been so caught up in the situation. You didn't even wait to find out. And you unleashed on him. And guess when you unleashed on him? At the very moment he was doing what you wanted him to do. He's calling you. He's showing up. And now you're giving him pain? Guess what that teaches him? It teaches him that when I finally do the right thing, I'm going to get punished. What would be a much better approach, sweetheart, is, when he calls, say, honey, I missed you so much. Are you okay? I was worried about you. Not make him wrong. Give him love. If he receives love, if he feels significant, if he feels connected to you, if he feels certain you're going to love him no matter what, I promise you're going to get a much better response out of him than if every time he screws up, you jump all over him. After a while, he's not going to want that pain. He's going to go look for someone else he doesn't link that pain to. See, if you want to understand conditioning, there's a great book I can recommend to you. It's called Don't Shoot the Dog. Fantastic book on conditioning. We're going to go into much more depth later on in the program, but I highly recommend it. It'll explain to you the process of conditioning in a great depth. But another way of doing it is go watch this guy on television, go get his DVDs, The Dog Whisperer. Cesar Millan. He actually got my tapes and programs when he was in Mexico, and it got him inspired. He came here, and he decided he was going to work in this dog washing location, and nobody would wash certain dogs because they were so out of control. I mean, so mean. And he would take those dogs in seconds, man. He'd have those dogs totally mellow. But if you've ever watched him, and his show is kind of funny to watch, whether you have a dog or not, I never thought I'd like a show like this, but I watched it a few times. You begin to realize that the way a dog behaves is such a result of their parent, i.e. their owner. So many owners spoil their dog or reinforce their bad behavior. I mean, this man really understands conditioning. So conditioning is the secret. You can condition any thought, any feeling, any behavior you reinforce enough. And here's the key to understand. There's 6 reinforcers. If somebody does something and you give them real love for doing it and you reinforce that behavior with love, they're going to want more of that. If, every time they do something, you make them feel more significant, sincerely, not blowing smoke, and you show them how important they are, how unique or special they are to do it, they're going to want to do it again. If they value certainty and you show them by doing this how their world is more in control or they have more comfort and more joy, they're going to want to do it again. The more you reinforce a person with the needs that they value most, the quicker that behavior becomes automatic. The way you know the conditioning works is you test it. If I worked with somebody, I remember Life Magazine came to me at one point and I was saying, I could change anyone. So they said, okay, we're going to bring you some challenging people. So they found me a person who was both claustrophobic and they had a massive, massive phobic fear of the heights. And so I said, okay, give them to me. And I began to work with this person, and I was conditioning this person and making it so that this feeling would change for them. And then to make it work, the only way to do it, know it really works, and not to kid yourself, was to test it. So I was in Atlanta, and I put them, I think it was the Hyatt Hotel, if I remember right, and they had these elevators that were all glass that, went inside the building and then outside the building. You could see all the height of everywhere, and got the person in there and fired it off, put them in there. Well, the only way to know the conditioning works is put them in the environment. If you can't physically put them in the situation, then you mentally put them there. But you want to test it to make it work. And that sets up step number 7, which is to make sure that the change lasts, relate it to something that they value highly. With Bob, I got him to see the importance of his living for his children. With Jim, it was the importance of being able to still contribute to people's lives. If you find something that people value highly, if you can help them create an environment that will reinforce them, then the change will last and last and last. Again, we'll talk about this one in a bit more detail later on. But, sometimes you want to test out the ecology of something. If this person makes this change, will the environment help them, or will the environment be more difficult? You've got to make them strong inside. If the environment's not going to support them, then you've got to help them link in that making this change is what I'm made for. Making this change is my identity. Making this change is what will save my children's lives. Making this change will help me make a difference in the world. Whatever they value most is what you want to link the change to. I'll tell you something, it's not always easy to do this. I recently had an experience where I wanted to show people what was possible. So I took a group of kids from the Middle East. I actually worked with some other individuals, and I brought 5 people from each of the major religions there in Israel and in Palestine. Obviously, 5 Muslims, Palestinians, 5 Christians, and 5 Jews. And they were all young people in their early 20s, and I picked them all because they had all gone through severe traumas, and they all had very, very strong feelings, as you might guess, about, quote, the other side. Now, one of them, for example, was a Palestinian young girl who was a Christian, and her car was shot up with 500 bullets because the Israeli police thought that she was a bomber. They had misidentified the car. So it killed her sister. It put bullets in her father. To this day, she still has a bullet inside of her. So you can imagine the emotion she was feeling. I brought in another person who had grown up in Hebron in the West Bank, and who had watched all their families basically moved out of that environment, and one that grew up in a refugee camp. So they have pretty strong feelings. And then, of course, I brought in, a young Jewish man that was just a great, great soul. And we were doing this in a documentary form so we could show people that you can change anyone. If I'm going to talk about creating lasting change, how do you really have an impact? I figured here's a powerful place to show it can be done, where the environment doesn't support the change. And so I was talking to this young man, and sure enough, here he is, so sweet and warm. And then on camera, and when we started talking about the challenges there between the Palestinians and the Israelis, it was like he became a different person. And he said on camera, he said, I'll wipe out any village, an entire village, I don't care, men, women, and children, just to keep one Jewish mother from crying again. And in it, you got to see his model of the world, this man who's loyal, who wants to make a difference, who cares. Instead of just judging him and saying he's a horrible person, you see what being a soldier does to somebody's mentality when they've lost family or friends. Anyway, I took these young people all together, and I took them to a place that we own in Fiji, and I took them there for a week, and we worked on them and gave them interventions, and then I took them to a seminar we did in London. I went back with them to Israel and to Palestine, and actually went into the West Bank just recently during some of the toughest times there. And what was really beautiful was these kids have become best friends. Now, the challenge is they're going in an environment like one of the young girls was saying, she's Palestinian and she's Muslim, and she said, all my friends, we all swore we would never even speak to an Israeli. And she said, it's ironic. Now, 3 Israelis are my best friends. My best friends are Jews. She said, I'd never believe it in a million years. Now, she can't go back and get reinforced by the environment, so we had to tie this to a higher value, to her thinking about all the pain and getting her to link inside of herself. Then unless she's part of the solution, the pain that she's already experienced will get more intense. And then we help to create an empowering environment because these kids, thanks to the internet, they can communicate with one another, and there's a location that they all can go and meet. And they do that now once a month, and they're all working on different forms of peace projects. One of them has a radio show, this young girl, Miriam, who works in this area. One of them's working in Hebron and capturing video when abuses happen on either side and pushing that out to the media so that it gets the world's attention and starts to balance things out. But each of them together have bonded. People that you think cannot change because they've been a certain way for years or the environment demands it, they can change if you use these 7 steps. The 7 steps work in the Middle East. They work in South Africa to a Nelson Mandela. They work with a child. They work with someone in prison. They work with anyone. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that everything happens instantaneously, because the change you maybe want to make in a society might take years or decades. But the changes you want to make in yourself, most of them, can be done now. Or if you want to make a change for somebody else, in short order, you can make it happen. It's just about being strategic. So I know I've dumped a lot on you here. We're going to take these 7 steps, and we're going to break them down one day at a time, go in depth, and give you a chance to practice with them. What I wanted to do today was give you the overview, so now you really get what the steps are and where we're going to go, the mechanics of it, so to speak. But I did want to finish by completing Bob's story. So I told you that Bob's boogieing on stage, right? You can picture it, born to be wild. He's got girls jumping around dancing for him. Everybody just loved Bob. Bob became the star of the program, right? So Bob leaves, and I don't know how long afterwards, maybe a week, 2 weeks later, I get this letter, and it's from his wife. Remember, his wife had no clue about this plan, and frankly didn't know about it when she sent the letter back. And she just said, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, but she said, listen, I just wanted to thank you. She said, you have transformed my husband in whatever number of time. Maybe it was 3 weeks. I can't remember. But she said, when he came to your program, frankly, I thought you were a guru. I thought you were somebody who was going to drink this Kool-Aid. And she said, but I was willing to try anything, because Bob at that point, had not worked in 3 years. He wasn't talking to our children. He was isolating himself. If friends or family came over, he wouldn't talk. And she said, he is a completely changed man. And I want to thank you. I don't know what you did, but she said, I'm not arguing with it. It's a miracle. She said, Bob's got his first job in 3 years. She said, but more importantly, I feel like I got my husband back, the man that I always knew. And he's so much full of life and so playful and so fun. She said, our life is transformed. And she said, the greatest thing, though, is he is so close to his children now. Our kids feel like their father is back. And she said, I can't express enough appreciation to you. God bless you. Thank you, and so forth. So beautiful letter, just beautiful letter, lit me up like a Christmas tree. That's why I do this stuff. It's why I'm doing this silly program right now, is because I'm hoping I can transfer a little bit of this. I'm not pretending I have all the answers, but I do know some things that work. And I know you know what works, so hopefully you can add some of this to your repertoire and just become even more impactful as a change agent. But the best part of this story is somewhat melancholy and yet so beautiful simultaneously. So I don't know exactly how long, roughly, let's say 2 years later, I'm in Fiji and I'm working on a project, a writing project, a book I'm working on. And I started thinking about how I wanted to open a particular chapter. And I thought, I want to open with a case history. I've had so many interesting case histories. Maybe one that really would rivet people. What's one that's riveted me? I thought of so many different cases. And then I thought of Bob. And I thought, wow, that's the one I should open with. I mean, somebody's going to kill themselves and their kids. That's pretty intense, And I said it was so beautiful how it turned out. So I turned to the head of my creative department who's with me. Her name's Pam Hendrickson. And I said, Pam, would you do me a favor? Would you follow up and find out how Bob's doing? I'm sure he's doing great, but I want to know, 2 years later, we always follow up. What's he doing like? How's his life? And Pam paused and looked at me and she said, I can't believe you're saying this. She said, I just received another letter from his wife. And she said, I brought it here as part of your mail. I mean, it's just total serendipity. And she said, rather than tell you verbally, let me go get it. So she went back to her bure, the place she was staying, and she came back and she gives me this letter. And the essence of the letter says, Dear Mr. Robbins, I have sad news to share with you. She said, I'm sure you remember my husband, Bob, who came to be with you. He was the man who, and she described it. And she said, unfortunately, he passed away last week in his sleep. He had a heart challenge and he died. And she said, while I have tremendous sadness to see my husband pass, she said, I feel like the woman in Titanic where I need to continue to live on and take care of our kids for him because he was such a good man. And she said, I'm telling you this also because I wanted you to know what a difference you made in Bob's life. She said, Bob was a new man when he came home. I think I wrote you previously about how he transformed in terms of his work. But the thing I wanted you to know is we were never closer than we were in these last 2 years. He was closer to me. He was closer to our children. He lived more in the last 2 years than I think he did in his entire life. So I'm sad to lose my husband. I'm grateful that he lived fully. And I remember sitting there reading this letter and just bawling, uncontrollably and just thinking, all this because, I wouldn't give up. All this because of some simple insights. All this because, God guides you. I think when you're trying to serve at the highest level and you won't give up, things come through you. All this because there is a way, believing there is a way to make a difference. There is a way to reach somebody no matter how impossible it seems. So that's why I'm doing this silly program. I want you to have the experience of knowing that you've made an even deeper difference. I'm sure you've made such a difference already in your family's lives and friends and associates or coworkers, or if you're a therapist, your clients. But there's always a deeper level we can reach. And that's the purpose of the journey of the next, 8 days left we've got together here. That's why I'm pouring so much into this stuff. And that's why you hear such passion in my voice, because lives can change. And all it takes is for you to step into a state of mind, emotion, and spirit where you forget about all the mechanics once you know them, and you just know that you're committed to serving and you know that you'll be guided, where you don't judge people, where you really figure out what is it that they want, what is it they need, where you enter their world, we find that leverage that can change it all, that can make it a must, where you break the patterns that don't work, where you lovingly help them find a way to define their problem in solvable terms, where you give them lots of alternative ways to think and feel and be and do in this environment that work, where you condition it so it sticks, and where you relate it to something they value immensely, or you help them create an environment that will reinforce them. Those 7 steps can change lives. I hope you see the value of them. I don't think these are the only 7 steps, but I hope you find them helpful. And if they are, if you think they'd be useful, then I look forward to spending time with you tomorrow, and we'll go to step number 1, understanding that world, and we'll go deep, and we'll have some fun with it. So I thank you for listening. No assignment today. All I want to do today is think about times in your life. If you want to, you can write down an example where you were able to create change and see how many of these steps you actually are aware that you did. Did your awareness and understanding of the situation help? Did you find a way to get leverage where you finally found a way to make change a must for that person or yourself? How did you break the pattern of what they were thinking or feeling or the meaning or how they're acting or yourself? Did you come up with a better way of looking at it, a new way to solve the problem, a new way to define it? Did you come up with some empowering alternatives? Did you condition it till it became, part of that person, reinforce them? Did you relate it to higher purpose? That might be a nice task. So if you want to do that, go for it. And I'm going to look forward to being with you tomorrow for day 3, where we're going to take ourselves a new level of depth of understanding and appreciating the world of those we want to help to create change for. And of course, as always, live with passion, and God bless.